Hey everybody, what's up? With you Ismail from cgalter.com. Now today I'm going to talk to you about gamma setup in 3ds Max in Vray. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with 3ds Max color management. We're going to talk about the display in 3ds Max, the viewport, and then at step 2 we're going to move on to Vray. We're going to configure some settings. So we're going to start with the frame buffer. We're going to activate it. We're going to talk about how to export the EXR files the right way, and then I'm going to talk to you about which bit depth to use, 16-bit over 52 bits. Okay. And to finish up the Vray part, we're going to talk about color mapping, which is really important because we want to export linear data. So make sure to pay attention to that one. It's really, really important. And step 3 is going to be, we're going to head over to a compositing software, and we're going to talk about After Effects and how to set up After Effects to work in a linear manner. We're going to open the same EXR in Photoshop, and then we're going to finish up with opening the EXR files back again in Nuke. So I'm going to show you how to work with Nuke and the EXRs. Okay, so with that being said, let's go ahead and get started, shall we?
Alright everybody, so what we're going to do here is we're going to create kind of a policy, okay, throughout the process, the linear process, from start to finish. So we're going to start with 3ds Max, as I said before, earlier, and then as a step 2, it's going to be Vray. We're going to go over some settings in Vray, and finally we're going to go over the compositing part. And we're going to talk about After Effects, Nuke, and Photoshop. Okay, so now the good news is, you see, in 2013, I'm using Autodesk 3ds Max 2014 here, but in 2013 version, we had an option here for the input and the output, okay? Now, a lot of people are worrying about this, and they have to change the, they have to use scripts and stuff to really get back and use the 2.2 gamma for the input. Well, you don't have to do that. The good news is Autodesk has made a new policy for this. So basically, when you're loading a file, a JPEG file from the internet, from the web, with a 2.2 gamma embedded in it, if it has this information, the gamma value, if it has this information, basically what Autodesk 3ds Max will do is going to de-gamma this file. And the same thing goes for if it doesn't have the information of the 2.2 gamma, it will look at its bit depth, okay? So the bit depth basically for a JPEG is 8-bit. And once it finds out that it's an 8-bit, it's going to apply a 2.2 gamma color management, okay? And if it's 16-bit or 32-bit, case of a TIFF file or an EXR file, it's going to ignore it, and basically because it's already with a gamma of 1. So, case of, for example, if you have a height map, a displacement map, you don't want 3ds Max to change the gamma of this map, because if it changed it, it's going to change the appearance of the displacement map on your model. All right. So let's go back to 3ds Max and configure the display. Now, I just want to tell you that the display has nothing to do with the calculation of the, when we click, the gamma, basically what it's going to affect is only the display. It has nothing to do with the calculation. Okay, so we start with the enable gamma load correction with, gamma to 2.2. I'm going to hit OK. And as you can see here, this brings the colors a little bit brighter because it did apply a 2.2 gamma correction to it. So what we want to do now, I'm going to switch to the material editor. What I want to do here is to match the color selector, okay, to the same gamma. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to Customize Preference, and I'm going to click on Effect Color Selector. And I'm going to hit OK. As you can see now, it's voila, it's matching the display that we have in the viewport. Now we want to match the material slot. I'm going to go back, click on Preference, and sorry, I'm going to click on Effect Material Editor. So I'm going to hit OK again, and there you go. It matches the color as well. Now, in case you have a texture file, as I said earlier, 3ds Max is going to apply it's going to de-gamma, while it's calculating. But for now, for display, it displayed as it is with the a 2.2 display. Okay. So while it's doing the calculation for the input, it's going to input it as a 2.2 JPEG. Basically, it's going to de-gamma before it's doing the calculation inside 3ds Max. Yeah, so, we want 3ds Max to calculate in a mathematically correct way so that we get realistic results. All right, so now that we've done with that, let's go ahead and switch to Vray and talk about Vray setup as well. Okay, now the most important part of Vray, which is Vray setup. Now, if you mess up these settings, basically later on in compositing, it won't be as correct. So, what we want here is to export the EXR files as they are produced by Vray. We don't want the color mapping in Vray, which is the tune mapping, to interfere and clamp the output or burn out some values or something. So we want to export things as they are calculated by Vray, okay, for compositing. First thing we have to do is to turn on the frame buffer, okay? So why the frame buffer? Because the frame buffer has more options. I prefer the frame buffer, the Vray frame buffer over the 3ds Max default one, which is this one. It doesn't have the options that the frame buffer has. Okay, like the history, the stuff that adds so much to Vray frame buffer. Now, with that being said, after this, we're going to configure the color mapping the right way. Now, this is really, really important, so pay attention. So basically, the type here is written hard by default in Vray 3. Now maybe in Vray, if you're using Vray 2.5, maybe it's the it's the linear multiply, the default one. So written hard here is linear multiply. I'm going to tell you why. Written hard, what it is? Written hard is a mix between linear multiply and exponential. So basically, if you put the burn value to 1 in written hard, you're using linear multiply. And if if you put here 0.5, basically you're using half of linear multiply and half of exponential. Exponential, basically what it does is that it compensates the shot, and this is not what we want, because we want to save all the raw data for later use in compositing, and then we do the tune mapping. Okay. So basically, I'm going to go with linear multiply, and I'm going to make this back to 1 by default. Now, here's another important part, which is the mode. Now, I'm going to change it to none, because I don't want, as I said earlier, I don't want the color mapping or the tune mapping in Vray to interfere and to modify anything on the file. Okay. So basically, if we go back here to the online docs from Chaos Group, the none, what it means is neither color mapping nor gamma are burnt into the final image, which is what we want. However, Vray will proceed with all its calculations as the color mapping and gamma are applied. Okay, so the noise thing, which I'm going to show you in a second. This can be useful, for example, if you know that you will apply some color correction to the image later on, but wish to keep the rendering itself in a linear space for compositing purposes. So this is what we want, right? This is the mode that we want. Now, in previous version, in 2.5, it was called don't affect color, adaptation only. But in this version 3, Vray 3, it's called none, okay? So we're going to change it to none, don't apply anything. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the gamma 2.2 here. Why we have to put it to 2.2. Now, by default, it's 2.2. So let me just put it to 1. I'm going to do a quick render here. Okay, so we have the render. I'm going to save it to the history. And I'm going to make it A. And I'm going to re-render the frame with a gamma of 2.2 here. Okay, so I'm going to save this again. And this is B, this is A. Okay. So as you can see here, with gamma of 1, we have a lot of noise in this area. So it helps, if you change the gamma to 2.2, it helps to get rid of a little bit of the noise, okay, in the scene. Sometimes you have to go to the Vray light as well and change the sampling, but it really helps a lot, okay? So now, just to sum up the color mapping part, color mapping is basically with these kind of modes. These modes basically act like a ND filter for a camera, for a lens. Okay, so even in photography, they use kind of filters to compensate the scene. So if they have overexposed areas all over, okay, so that they have, you know, even out, so that they can even out the exposure in the scene. So basically the same thing happened in V-Ray. In V-Ray, you have linear color mapping versus the exponential color mapping. So linear, basically it's not going to change anything for the tone mapping, but if you use an exponential, it's going to compensate the scene, which what we see here in this corner, like versus the linear. But since we are going to export EXR files for compositing later on, what we have to do is to export the raw data as it is. And we don't worry about this because we can use the tone mapping in later on in compositing to get rid of this over bright areas. Here's an example of a EXR file. So basically, if you're using multiple passes for the light and stuff, you don't have to worry about over bright areas. I'm going to show you in a second the example. So I'm adding in the V-Ray light, the sunlight, and then I'm modifying the sunlight, right? So if I have burnt out areas here, I can just go ahead and modify that light pass, right? And I have the EOS lights as well as a separate pass, and all the other lights, right? So basically, you get full control after rendering, and this is what we want. We want to do the tone mapping after we have done the rendering process. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to save EXR files the right way. So all you have to do is to go back to the frame buffer area and click on the V-Ray raw image file, and you have a little button here. Click. Now here you can change the save as type to open EXR file. And if you just name this and save it as it is, it's going to be saved as a 16-bit. And if you check the 32-bit, then it's going to save it as a 32-bit. So when do you use 32-bit and when do you use 16-bit? Is 16-bit enough or not? So for me, 16-bit basically, I use it when I have animation because it's less sizey, if you like. 32-bit can go really high sometimes, like the files can go to 30 megabyte, 14 megabyte. Now this is so much for thousands of frames, right? But if you are doing animation, I really prefer to use the 16-bit over 32-bit because it's like really enough, and it's really enough to compensate the scene. I don't have to render 32-bit. But really, if I have still frames, and just for the fun, for the sake of it, I can go really higher, and I save EXR files as 32-bit. Right, so with that being said, I think we have done the setup for the color mapping, frame buffer, and I showed you how to export the EXR files. Now we're going to head over to compositing, and I'm going to show you how to set up After Effects first, then we're going to move on to Photoshop, and then we're going to finish by compositing in Nuke. Alright guys, now compositing. Now this is the fun part, right? So what we're going to do, I'm going to load some EXR files here. One EXR file actually. So this is the result of that EXR file. I can't read here because, you know, the viewer that I have for Windows can't. So this is really the result. This is JPEG version. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to open the EXR file here in After Effects, sorry. And I'm going to drop here on this icon to create a new composition. It takes some time because it's an EXR, so it's a little bit sizey. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to Effects, Color Correction, and I'm going to add Exposure. I just want to show you something here before we go into. So I'm going to add 3 exposures actually. So the first exposure will be with a value of 2. The second will be a value of 4. I'm going to tell you in a second why. And the third, okay. So the first one I added a value of, an exposure value of 2. And the second exposure value of 4. If you add this to this, it's going to be 6, right? So I'm going to go to the exposure number 3, and I'm going to put it to -6. Now normally it has to go to the original, right? But it didn't. So I'm going to duplicate the original here. I'm going to call it original. And I'm going to delete those. The other one will keep the effect, of course. So just to show you so this is, okay. So here's here's the original, and here's with the effect. So I have added this just to see the difference. So now I'm going to change, now I'm going to do the settings for After Effects. So I'm going to click on the icon here, or you can go to File, Project Settings. Now you're going to get this window. You can also get access to this by just clicking here. So I'm going to change it to 32-bit. And I'm going to change the workspace to sRGB, like Vray, right? It's the color space. It's like sort of a mask in top of the linear data, the dark linear data, just to show you so that it looks appealing for your eye. And then I'm going to click on linear workspace. Linear workspace, what are you going to do? You know, what it says here actually. It's going to do neutral blending, you know, if you use blending mode. And also it's going to be good for motion blur. If you have motion blur, it's going to be more accurate. All right, so I'm going to click OK. Now look what happened here now. All right, you see? Okay, so what did happen? Now I'm going to click to see before and after. So this is the original, and this is the one with the effects, right? So what I've done here is just the setup to a 32-bit versus working in 8-bit before. And basically it gives me the result that I had in the original file, which is it did some math. So 2 plus 4 now works because I'm working in a linear floating point. And that will wrap up the video. All right, let's move on to Photoshop. Okay, here we are in Photoshop. So Photoshop works the same way as After Effects, a layer-based software, really. And one quick difference is that, you know, in Photoshop, you don't have to set up anything. Photoshop reads the EXR file automatically, and it does apply an sRGB color space to it. So you don't have to do anything. So I'm going to load the EXR file here. I'm going to talk to you about other things than that, which is really important. I'm going to load this file here, which is this image. Hit OK. It's going to take some time because the file is really huge. I think it's 400 megabytes. Yeah, it's a lot because it has a lot of passes and stuff. So I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna come back. Okay, so here we go. We have an EXR file. It's a 32-bit floating point EXR file. You know, Photoshop did read the file. It's in 32-bit. And it did apply an sRGB color space, which, you know, we can see that because, you know, it looks like what I've seen in the frame buffer. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you one of the limitations of Photoshop when it comes to EXRs is that, not EXR, but when it comes to 32-bit floating point, is that, you know, in adjustments, not all the adjustments are supported. Not all the adjustments are linear. There's not, you know, like the curves, for example, it doesn't support linear floating point. Now I get around this using a plugin called PhotoLux from Magic, you know, from Red Giant, I guess. PhotoLux does works and support the EXR and the 32-bit floating point. And just to demonstrate this to you, I'm going to show you an example here. I'm going to apply an exposure. And I'm going to apply another exposure. This one I'm going to give it 2. And this one I'm going to give it -2. So I'm going to do the inverse. And I'm going to get the same image, right? So we have the same kind of image. You know, you may have this question, how to extract the passes if you have an EXR file with a lot of passes, if you want to use the multi-pass compositing method to tone map your image. So there is a plugin called OpenEXR, which does exist for After Effects, Adobe Premiere, and Photoshop. And you know, the After Effects plugin is for free, but it has some limitation. You know, you can't extract all the passes, but if you want to go pro, if you like the plugin, you know, you can try it with After Effects. If you like it, you can go with the Pro EXR. You have even the 15 days trial to try it before buying it. It's $75. So if you're going to use it for a lot of projects, it's really worth the money. So what this plugin is going to allow you is to extract all the passes that you need for your multi-pass compositing. So if you have, the diffuse color, the GI pass, the reflection pass, SSS, velocity, Z depth, you name it. So this plugin does this for you and allow you to create kind of something like this. One second, I'm going to show you. I use Nuke for this, but I never used Photoshop to create multi-pass compositing. But so in Nuke, it will look something like this. It's the same thing in Photoshop. It's just layer based. This one is node based. So for example, the EOS light that I have here, they were a little bit burnt out in the original file, as you can see here. Now I can go to exposure and apply a color correction to that, and I can get it, but it applies on the whole image. So using multi-pass compositing, you can apply it to just that light, which I did in this example, and it got me this. Okay, so this is Photoshop and how to work with that, and also I showed you the limitations and how to get around this using the plugin called PhotoLux, and then I showed you how to extract the passes using Pro EXR files. Okay, let's move on to Nuke. I love this application. So to Nuke we go. Now in Nuke it's really easy. Everything is configured. You don't need to do anything. Nuke is really linear, fully linear. All the nodes are really linear, and it's really made to be a linear platform. So the same thing, it's just instead of layer based, it's node based. It's really my personal preference. I like to work in a node based environment because it's you have everything in front of you. You don't need to go to any tab or anything to find the information. You have everything in front of you, and it's a non-destructive process, and you just you have a lot more control and faster result and faster and smooth work. So I'm gonna open the EXR file here just to show you. So this is the bathroom that I showed you earlier from the example earlier, and just to keep the transparency going, I'm just gonna apply an exposure, to prove to you that math is working fine. So let's say here I'm going to do this, and I want to go back, so I'm going to do the inverse with the other one, and I'm going to apply a minus 0.23. Yeah, and deactivate, activate. So as you can see, we have the same image. So math is completely working because Nuke is, as I said before, a linear platform. So everything you load into Nuke will work just absolutely fine. So I told you about the extracting passes. I showed you earlier in with Photoshop and After Effects, you can extract those passes out of the EXR file. Well, in Nuke it's completely integrated, and there is some nodes for that. So I can apply a shuffle node, and I can extract any pass that I have on this EXR file. So I can extract, for example, the lighting pass, and I can extract another shuffle. I can extract I don't know, I have different kind of masks as well. I've created different Vray light selections. So this is the Doom light, the HDR light itself. So yeah, you can work with this all the way to create a multi-pass compositing composite or project or script. So really Nuke is my personal preference, but you don't have to use Nuke. You can use Photoshop or you can use After Effects. Just remember, if you're going to extract those files out of the EXR file, you're gonna need to use this plugin called Pro EXR file. So really this part really wrap up this guide, if you like, the setup. So we've covered everything. We've started with 3ds Max, and we covered the display for 3ds Max. We tried to match the viewport with the color selector and the material slot, and then we moved on to Vray, and we talked about using the Vray frame buffer, using the color mapping, and really to change the color mapping to linear multiply and to gamma 2.2, and as a mode we used none. Okay, so that we have the untouched raw negative, if you like, quote unquote. And after this I showed you how to export the EXR files the right way, and I told you about the 16-bit over the 32-bit, so pay attention to that one. If you have animation, use 16-bit. It's just advice, so you can feel free to use the 32-bit. It's just going to be a little bit sizey since you're going to have thousands of frames. Yeah, then I showed you how to work with After Effects, and I showed you how to work in Photoshop, and finally in Nuke. So yeah, you have the complete process. I guess that it's really clear. I hope that it's really clear. And if you have any questions, please comment below, or send me emails to support@cgalter.com, or to my personal email, coldframe1@gmail.com. So yeah, keep in touch, and if you have any question, please let me know. Thank you so much, and talk soon.